A very good morning to everybody. I am Dr. Anju Babu, scientist and coordinator at Envis Resource Partner of WII Wildlife Institute of India. It is my pleasure to welcome Dr. Dhananjay Mohan, Director, Wildlife Institute of India, Dr. Ruchi Badola, Dean and Scientist G, Dr. Parag Nigam, a Nodal Officer, Envis Cell at the Institute, Dr. Bilal Habib, Associate Nodal Officers, Dr. Shiva Kumar, Coordinator, Envis Cell, faculties, dignitaries, researchers, and students who have joined us at this event, both at the Institute as well as virtually. The Elephant Cell and the Envis Resource Partner at the Wildlife Institute of India have joined hands to celebrate 10th anniversary of the World Elephant Day today. The theme of this year's celebration is Save Elephants to Save the Ecosystem, personifying prehistoric beauty, theological relevance, and environmental importance. Today, we honor one of Earth's most magnificent creature, the elephant. The inaugural World Elephant Day was launched on 12th August 2012 by Canadian filmmakers Patricia Sims and Michael Clark, along with the Elephant Reproduction Foundation of Thailand, to bring attention to the urgent plight of Asian and African elephants. The elephant is loved, revered, and respected by people and cultures around the world. And in India, it is also worshipped. Yet, we balance on the brink of seeing the decline of these magnificent creatures due to several reasons. World Elephant Day asks you and us to experience elephants in non-exploitative and sustainable environments where elephants can thrive under care and protection. On this day, organizations and individuals can rally together to give a voice to the issues threatening elephants. This powerful collective global movement offers a way to establish and endorse conservation solutions to make the world a safer place for the elephants and their habitats so future generations can appreciate them. On this World Environment Day, let us express our concern, share our knowledge, and support solutions for the better care of captive and wild elephants alike. Therefore, the Wildlife Institute of India's Elephant Cell, under the guidance of Dr. Parag Nigam and Dr. Bilal Habib, and Envis Resource Partner under the guidance of Dr. Shiva Kumar, have lined up a number of interesting talks and other sessions to mark this special day. All the sessions for this day are streaming live on our institute's website. We will start our celebration with the inaugural address from our Dean, Dr. Ruchi Badola, followed by 2 talks on elephant conservation, which will be followed by release of a documentary that is prepared by the Elephant Cell of WIA. And after that, we will be announcing the results of different events that were conducted during last 1 week to mark the celebration of the World Environment Day, World Elephant Day. I'm sorry. With this, I now welcome Dr. Ruchi Badola, Scientist G, and Dean to give her welcome address and start the event. Over to you, madam.
Thank you, Dr. Anju. Dr. Dhananjay Mohan, Director, Wildlife Institute of India. My colleagues, Dr. Shiva Kumar, Dr. Anju Barot, coordinators of the Envis Center, Dr. Parag Nigam and Dr. Bilal Habib, nodal officers for the Elephant Cell at the Wildlife Institute of India. Thank you very much for having me here today and actually pulling me into the celebration of this Elephant Day. Because as I was discussing with Dr. Anju, this is very special to me because I began my career by working on elephants on a very different dimension of elephant conservation at that time, which was people-forest interaction in the forest corridor, which was linking the Rajaji and Corbett National Parks. So I, coming from an economics background, was thrown into the elephant country and supposed to work on various aspects of it. Of course, that is a long story, and I will come back to my work a little later. But elephants are very special to our culture, civilization, our psyche, and our religion. I mean, Lord Ganesha, the genetically modified version of the human or elephant, whatever we may call it, whom we call upon at every auspicious occasion. Then we have the magnificent and the beautiful Eravat, who was actually a product of the Samudra Manthan and was given to Lord Indra and supposed to be, the brother of sun and the elephant of the clouds. And it is said that he actually stands at the doors of the heavens to welcome people when they reach there. Apart from that, very interestingly, like the Atharvaveda, which has a whole text on, Ayurveda, there is a South Indian epic which is totally devoted to treatment of elephants, that is Hastayurveda, which has been written by sage Palakapya, and it is a part of Nakul Sahita, which is a veterinary text. So the importance of elephants in our culture and tradition cannot be underestimated. And it is very apt that this country, India, which holds the largest population of Asiatic elephant, which is 70% of the population of the Asiatic elephants in its range today, celebrates this in all its glory. So I wish you all a very, very happy World Elephant Day, we call it. Yeah. So coming back to my own work, as I said, it was a corridor which was connecting two very, very important protected areas and today also. And now, of course, both of them are tiger reserves. Now, while these protected areas had protection by virtue of their status, legal status, the intervening corridor was a reserve forest and surrounded by a large number of villages where people were actually dependent for their day-to-day requirements. Now, what I'm trying to remember is the issues at that time. What were the issues related to elephant conservation and elephant coexistence with people during 1989 when I started my work, and today when we are celebrating in 2021 the World Elephant Day. So for us, the prime importance was to estimate, what was the people's dependence on this corridor, how we could minimize this dependence. And the biggest problem in that area that was identified was that the elephants, while going to, migrating between the two larger areas, were actually coming down to the valley, which was taken over by agriculture, following their instinctive and traditional migratory routes, because they will avoid the steep slopes. So trying to follow the river valleys and coming down in a loop pattern, that was their movement pattern. And that pattern was well studied during our time, and mitigation measures were devised at that time. So that was the biggest issue. Today, when we talk about the elephant conservation, we realize that elephants are rapidly colonizing new areas. For example, Chhattisgarh, Madhya Pradesh, Maharashtra. These are the areas where they were not elephants in the last 6-7 decades had not been reported, particularly in Chhattisgarh. Today, we have large populations of these animals in these areas. And I think this population, conservation and the, increase in population and recolonization is largely a result of excellent conservation efforts by the government of India. It has been given its due importance. It has been recognized that what is the ecological importance of the species, and that is why we can see the results. However, this is the biggest challenge today that wildlife conservation in general and elephant conservation in particular is facing, is the human-wildlife conflict. And the primary reason, there are very interesting, and before I talk about colonizing, something very interesting is happening closer home. Actually, in my own old study area, when I visit those areas, there has been a lot of road construction in the Himalayas. So, the areas are being leveled. The steepness of the slopes is being reduced. And elephants are going to higher and higher areas and going into areas from where they were not reported earlier. So many factors are contributing to them going to newer areas. So coming to the conflicts, I think everybody knows major conflicts are resulting from linear development, which has become very, very rapid. And a few days back, when one of the MSc students was presenting her work on Kaziranga, I don't remember the exact figures, but she had presented a figure of 40 vehicles per hour during the early 90s. And today, I think she was presenting a figure of about 300 vehicles per 200 vehicles per hour on the same route. So we can imagine that these areas, which are the strongholds of elephants and other, large mammals, how these populations will fare in such a, kind of disturbance. And we keep on seeing these video clippings and, WhatsApp of elephants being, chased by people and followed by people on roads and so on and so forth. So linear development is very, very challenging. Electrification of railway lines. I mean, railway lines was one issue. Today we are talking of electrification on the traditional railway routes, which are, and some of these, happened in Rajaji National Park a few years back. Today there is a proposal to do the electrification of the railway route, which is passing through Dudhwa Tiger Reserve, and I'm sure it must be happening in other areas also. So these are very, very huge challenges. Again, mining, particularly areas of Odisha, Chhattisgarh, and parts of Madhya Pradesh and all, which are facing intensive mining pressures. So habitat degradation is again a huge challenge. And one very interesting figure is that Chhattisgarh, which has a very, very disturbed habitat for mammals, large mammals, particularly elephants. On a 40,000 square kilometer of area, we have just 250 elephants. And there are almost, give or take a few, almost 100 incidents of people getting injured or, dying due to elephant conflict. And huge incidences of crop and property loss. Whereas in Uttarakhand, in Rajaji National Park, 800 square kilometer of area, we have about 300 elephants. But you know that the conflict incidents could be 1 or 2 at the most in a year, because this is excellent habitat. So of course, it is a challenge. Conservation challenge exists because Rajaji is surrounded by high population density cities, and all other kinds of challenges are there. But it is nothing compared to what is happening in areas where the habitats have really degraded. Another thing which is very interesting is the habits, traditional habits of people. Where elephants existed, people have evolved, their lifestyles and livelihoods around this whole issue of living with elephants. Be it South India, be it even places like Uttarakhand, where, for example, in Uttarakhand, people will make machans on trees to chase away elephants, whatever they may use, firecrackers, drum. But in Chhattisgarh, even today, they are not following that pattern. They will just stand on their fields and try to chase away elephants. What will happen? People will definitely get killed in such a scenario. So again, relearning to live with these pachyderms is another challenge in these areas. And several solutions. I mean, I was going through literature, and there is a huge table that one of my students compiled only on the different methods that are being used to deal with elephant-related issues. But we know that some of the traditional methods of trenches, electric fencing, biofencing are working well in certain areas where they have been traditionally used. In fact, one of the civil society organization working around Manas Tiger Reserve about 2 years ago, they were presenting in a DST meeting how they have been able to take care of some of the conflict issues by planting, these lemons with thorns. What species of lemon, I don't know, they were planting, but they were very, very bushy and had thorns. And, it was a livelihood source for the people. And it was also a deterrent for the elephants to enter into the villages. So, these are the solutions, and there is no one size that fits all. We have to be very site specific in our solutions. What we really need is a lot more studies and site specific studies into elephant habits of people, extremely important, and particularly of people who live in the borderlands of elephant rich areas. What are the agricultural practices, how we can replace these crops with crops which the elephants don't like to raise, what kinds of lessons we can learn from other areas in terms of deterrence, and even the movement pattern, particularly the seasonal movement pattern. For corridors and all, like early detection systems could be very, very useful, because some of these areas are used by elephants only seasonally during the migratory patterns. So here it will be very useful to have the early detection systems. Then again, I should say, something which is like a this is like a thorn in the sides of the forest department and the people, is the compensation program. Now, I mean, of course, a lot has been said and written about the compensation schemes and from both sides. But, for example, the government of Karnataka and the Karnataka Forest Department has now instituted an online, extremely transparent system for getting compensation for crop damages or any kind of loss. So these could be some of the things. But at the end of it, if we really want to have conservation and, the theme I was reading, living with these gentle giants, we have to look beyond all these measures. When we talk about people who live in the fringes of biodiversity rich areas, we always think of finding cheap solutions, okay, low cost solutions. Conservation is not cheap. If you give peanuts, you're going to give monkeys only. You're going to get monkeys. So conservation is not cheap. Today, we cannot afford to have low cost, low budget conservation. We really need to invest in conservation. And conservation will happen only with the people and the people who live in the borderlands of such areas. So why we cannot look at options like payment for ecosystem services, rather than making them beggars by giving them compensations and doles and programs? Why we cannot engage them as conservationists, as conservators for these species? If there is an agriculture field and in the fringes of a forest corridor, which is facing a lot of, this kind of conflict, that can easily be converted into an elephant migratory route, and the owner can be compensated. And we have proposed these in one of our recent papers, which was published in Science Reporter. We can share it also I should share it with the elephant cell. But these examples exist, and we really need to implement them. So rather than becoming a victim of human-elephant conflict, the same people get a job as a conservationist. And then tourism. We can take example from Africa. Many situations do not fit, but tourism, of course, can happen. So this kind of packages, payments for coexistence. Simply, many governments have adopted it, and if you can look up for the Grain for Green and Grain for Blue program, which was implemented by the Chinese government to conserve its, wetlands as well as its sloping areas, very, very steep areas in the catchment of the Huangho River. So I think we really need to think out of the box. We really need to think of these examples, which seek, including people. Having people's participation in conservation does not involve only talking to them, making them, giving them better compensation schemes and so on. We need each hand on board, every hand on board for conservation today. And therefore the people, which is a huge resource, they're existing, who understand the elephants, who understand their patterns, they can very easily be used for this particular purpose. So citizen science, you may call it whatever, but I think there that resource needs to be tapped very carefully, along with cutting edge scientific research. But it will not come cheap, that is for sure. So if we want results, we should be, as a society, ready to pay the cost for that conservation. So thank you all. I think I've gone over my time, and thank you for giving me this opportunity, and a very, very happy World Elephants Day to you all once again. Thank you.
Thank you very much, ma'am, for this wonderful and inspirational inaugural welcome address, highlighting and enlightening us with all the threats, issues, challenges, conflicts that is happening in today's time, not only in India, and also sharing the best practices from all across the country, different states which are practicing good practices, and also from different countries. So thank you very much, ma'am, and I'm sure we will share the paper that you were just referring to, and also the reports. Now, keeping the momentum on, I invite Mr. N. Lakshmi Narayan, project scientist, Elephant Cell at Wildlife Institute of India, for his talk on Knowing the Gentle Giant, Story of Elephant Conservation in Changing Landscapes. Over to you, Mr. Lakshmi Narayan.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Hope I'm audible.
Yes, you are.
And can you see the screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Good morning, and it's a great pleasure actually to be nominated for this talk. And I'm really thankful to the NVIS cell and the Elephant cell of the Institute for giving me this opportunity. So actually, Dean ma'am has very, very nicely summarized what I'll be also talking for the next 20 minutes. So the issues are all now more or less we are getting to know them. So I'll just get into the slides without much ado. Okay, can you all see the slides?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. Okay, see, there are 3 species of elephants. This is World Elephant Day, and the last one below is the African forest elephant, recently recognized as a species. There was a lot of issue in declaring it as a separate species, but we have 3 of them, the Asian elephants and then the 2 African cousins. And compared to the African elephants, we have only 10% of, we have less than 40,000 elephants in the wild in Asia, which is just 10% of the African elephant population. So in a way, Asian elephants are actually poorer cousins. And within India, we have 4 regions where elephants are distributed. In the north, we have about 2,000 elephants, then northeast, east central region, and also the southern India, which supports the largest population. So all these areas together actually constitute not more than 4% of the India's landmass. This is something that we need to note. It's just 4% of the entire country that elephants are occurring. So elephants are extreme generalists. They can occur in a variety of habitats, and they can occur in wet evergreen forests that we see in the Northeast India in places like Arunachal, parts of Assam, and also in the Western Ghats, in Anamalais, Nilgiris, all these areas which still have excellent evergreen forests, elephants do occur there. They also do occur in dry areas, the leeward areas of the Western Ghats, parts of Eastern Ghats. All these are dry zones where elephants do occur. But if you look at the stronghold of elephants, they actually attain high densities in the deciduous forests, basically the moist and dry deciduous forests. But if you actually talk about elephant habitat, it's better to talk about elephant landscapes, what we call as complete elephant landscape. The complete elephant landscapes actually should ideally comprise of all these different habitats. So that gives them the leverage to move between the habitats, tracking forage. All that an elephant does in a landscape is actually tracking forage. So when it is raining during monsoon, all these dry zones actually have excellent grass growth. So you will find a lot of them actually in the dry zones, dry thorn habitats. And during dry season, when when surface water availability is not that good, they will all move to wet areas, evergreen forests. And there are also seasonal attractions, fruits, then some of the trees that put up excellent flowers and all. So they do actually track forage and operate between the areas. Ideally, and a complete elephant landscape should encompass all these habitats, riparian tracts and others. But unfortunately, not many landscapes actually can boast of this completeness. We do have, but many of them have become actually relics of small areas. And elephants can occur in human use areas. So there is a need to be cautious about this. Elephants can definitely occur. They are extreme generalists. Given a chance, they would occur anywhere. But there is actually high cost of them existing in human use areas, and the cost is for both people as well as elephants, which we will see a little later. So we need to be cautious about elephants occurring in human use areas. We have to plan well, no doubt about it, but we cannot say that elephants like sparrows or crows can occur completely in human use areas. That is not possible for them. See, and elephants and people have very similar habitat preferences in a way. So we also like low-lying areas, river valleys, where crop cultivation is much easier for us, well-irrigated areas. And elephants also have a very similar preference. But unfortunately, over time, they have lost a lot of such productive habitats. So in those areas, elephants have been competitively excluded. So even in people generally ask, elephants are in 1,000 square kilometers area, still there is a lot of conflict. 1,000 square kilometers quantity is fine, but if you look a little detailed, zoom into the landscape, some of the productive habitats may not be there. So it's not just the quantity, but also quality of habitat matters. And see, we have a major pandemic now. Every one of us suffered. Entire world is suffering. We have major issues, health issues, poverty issues, whole lot of other things. So what is the need for elephant conservation in this desperate time? So there is a critical need. There is a critical need. So our only main defense in the face of climate change 20 years ago was a story. People did not realize it, but now every one of us realize. Now many states are battered by floods. A few months ago, states were all battered by droughts. So we are seeing all of these changes within our own lifetime. Within the last 30, 40 years, we are seeing punctuated droughts, high rainfalls, and climate change is already on us. So now science has made it very clear. Our only line of defense in the face of climate change is actually nature conservation, biodiversity conservation. That's our only line of defense. So when we talk about biodiversity conservation, there are too many things to conserve. Firstly, ideally, we would like to conserve the entire suite of biodiversity. And you have multiple approaches. So bees are functionally very important. So you can focus on bees and you can also focus on elephants. But if you suppose take a small species, their habitat requirements would be relatively low. But if you invest on species like elephants, you actually end up saving large areas because their home ranges are large. It's not possible to put them in small areas. So by default, you end up conserving all other biodiversity. That's why species like elephants and tigers are actually known to be flagship species or umbrella species in biodiversity conservation. You invest on them, you get many other species conserved in their, and in the umbrella. So every species is important. There is no prioritizing elephant over bee or tiger over, say, a small cat. All these species are important, but you pick species that can actually have a universal appeal, and they can also serve as actually umbrellas. So elephant is certainly one. And when we actually invest on these large species, large mammals with large home ranges that require different types of habitats, you end up saving important watersheds. If you take the case of peninsular India, many rivers, many peninsular Indian rivers actually originate in the Western Ghats, parts of Eastern Ghats that are designated for tiger or elephant conservation or large mammal conservation. So it's not a waste of effort. Even though elephant habitat constitute only 4% of the entire landmass, several rivers originate from those areas. This is Periyar, and this is Ramganga River in Corbett landscape. There are plenty of examples. And in addition to these ecosystem services, elephants and people in India also have a very strong cultural affinity for a very long period of time. So now coming to threats, there could be multiple threats that elephants are facing, elephant conservation face in the country, in Asia. But the foremost threat for them is definitely habitat related issues. Habitat related threats like loss or degradation. And habitat loss, when we talk about habitat loss in an Indian context, it is not that severe like what we see in South Asian countries, some of the South Asian countries where hectares of forests are cleared every year, or in Amazonia for that matter, where hectares of forests are every year cleared. Habitat loss in India for elephants is more inside us. There is a lot of degradation. And there is also loss of these critical habitats like river fronts, riparian tracts, small but productive habitats. So that can be more inside us. It is more difficult to detect, but it is nevertheless, it can have a very serious effect on their habitat use per se. And more than any other threat, more than any other contemporary threat, linear infrastructure development in the elephant habitats is a major threat. You have these roads, railway lines, mineral mines, and associated development. So when we talk about these developments, we often look at the gross area that is lost and try to, provide mitigation. So mitigation often is not possible because at best we can provide permeability. Permeability is a very critical thing. It can help the animals to move between habitats. But the impact of these linear barriers, these developments on the habitat itself would be very difficult to mitigate. And as symbol of biodiversity, it is not adequate to just provide safe passage for one species, because ideally we should conserve the entire suite of biodiversity, although we pick a few as mascots. So it's not possible often to actually mitigate the impact of linear development, although there is complacence these days that impacts can be mitigated, which is a little difficult to actually grasp. And as I said, see, this is one of the structures that have come up in a good elephant habitat in central India. So the loss that has happened, the forest loss and the linear break, it cannot be restored just by providing permeability in a few locations. The loss is going to be there forever. And although there are a lot of reasons why elephants get into conflict, the major trigger, the first trigger often is the habitat-related threats. Habitat-related threats are the primary driver of conflict, although there could be several other factors that later on add to it. And it's very unfortunate, despite all the efforts, we are still losing on an average 500 human lives due to conflict. And unfortunately, conflict is borne primarily by the poorest of the poor people, marginal people, communities that are already in poverty. So it's not just an economic problem, it is also a social problem. And I think we all have collective responsibility to actually be part of the solution. And it's not just people who are suffering. Elephants are also facing the brunt. I don't want to show these pictures on this wonderful day, but still this is the reality. This cannot be kept out because every year we lose about 100 elephants directly due to conflict reasons. And that still would be an underestimate. We don't know how many actually are affected by conflict. And at least 50% of the resources earmarked for elephant conservation is actually invested in conflict mitigation. So there are several ways. I will not get into it considering the time limitations. We have several options like these time-tested physical barriers, trenches, fences, walls. And when those traditional simple structures do not work, as elephants keep learning, we will have to actually start investing in more expensive structures like these railway fences and all, which are very expensive, but nevertheless in some areas effective as well. And all that effectiveness is dependent actually on how well we maintain them. And in addition to these physical barriers, there are a whole lot of other solutions that people are trying to experiment, or rather experimenting. So there could be actually there are chemical repellents, people actually promote chili fences, honeybee fences, all these barriers, deterrents are all there, but they require scientific validation. They have been tested in many areas. They can be tested in many areas, but so far we do not have any strong scientific validation, scientific validation to actually take them up at a large scale. So it's still in an experimental stage. Am I audible? Am I audible?
Yes, you are audible, but your slides are not moving.
Okay, even here my slides are not moving. Okay, so these are options, and also we have excellent. See, one of the best resource we have in the country is actually human resources. My slides are not moving, so I'll just continue. Human resources. We have some of the best Kumki elephants. We have excellent trackers, excellent mahouts, wonderful forest staff, good biologists, all of them. Yeah.
Lakshmi sir, the slides are moving now.
Yeah.
Okay, slides are moving.
Yeah.
Okay, all these mitigation measures that we have been talking is basically addressing the symptoms. We are trying to see the conflict is happening. We are trying to do something, but the ultimate solutions actually lie in keeping the remnant habitats sacrosanct. That's very, very important. There cannot be second thought about it. So we are not talking about 30% of setting aside 30% of the country. 4% is where elephants are there. Even in fact, it's not even 4%, it's lesser than that. At the maximum, they can be there up to 5% if you consider the new extensions also. So keeping this 4 or 5% properly is what is required for actually long-term elephant conservation, because we cannot actually compromise this existing ruminant habitats and still vouch for elephant conservation. It's very difficult. Elephants can occur outside of forests, but their primary determinant of elephant conservation is actually having intact habitats for them. So where there cannot be compromises. So tasks like identification of lands for restoration and consolidation is very, very, very important. And if we do not do that, there is a risk of elephants actually dispersing into new areas. If the intact habitats are not maintained properly, and if the habitat quality deteriorates, there is a threshold beyond which elephants can actually start dispersing into new areas. So we do not have much forest left for them to colonize. We have very limited area left where elephants are not there, tropical forests, primary habitat for them. So if they move out of their ranges, they often end up only in human use areas where there is very high conflict and it's difficult to manage. And there are several such dispersals that are happening. So a small herd of elephants moving all through the China has got all the media focus, but we have several examples from India. Many areas where elephants were not there, Chhattisgarh, South Bengal, South Andhra Pradesh, recently into Madhya Pradesh, all these areas, elephants have started moving. They're trying to establish ranges, which are hardly there for them. So it becomes a big challenge. We have been working in Chhattisgarh for last 4 or 5 years. It's one of the areas that have actually been, witnessing elephants coming from neighboring states. And Madam has already summarized the Chhattisgarh scenario. It's very difficult to manage. Only a small population, but if you look at the number of deaths, it's around 70 per every year. If you take the case of Karnataka, Karnataka has 5,000 elephants, less than 50 deaths. Chhattisgarh has hardly 300 elephants, but still 80 deaths. That clearly explains the magnitude of the problem. So we will have to invest on habitats. Maintaining integrity of habitats is critical for elephant conservation. With that, I would like to thank again the elephant and NVIS cells, the nodal officers, Dr. Nigam, Dr. Bilal Habib, both for the elephant cell, Dr. Sivakumar of NVIS cell, Amir, Uday, Jayjit, Anju ma'am, and several others. And I would like to dedicate this talk to Mr. Ajay Desai, one of the best elephant biologists, wildlife biologists the country had produced. So he has passed away. It's very difficult to actually fill his role. We need institutions to do that, and hopefully things move on. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lakshmi Narayanan. It was a wonderful talk encompassing all the current conflicts and challenges that elephant conservation is seeing in the country and the relevant mitigation measures also. So thank you very much for this talk. I will now move on to the second talk of the day, which will be given by Mr. Jayjit Das. Jayjit Das is a DST Inspire Fellow at the Wildlife Institute of India. And he'll be talking on wandering giants, meandering rivers, and the thundering congregations. Jayjit Das, please start your presentation. Over to you now.
Stop screen.
Dr. Lakshmi Narayanan, could you please stop sharing your screen so that we can start sharing from our side?
Yeah.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. So, first of all, I'd like to thank all the organizers of this event, the Envis Center and the Elephant Cell for providing me with this wonderful opportunity of sharing or talking about my work in the Raji landscape. So, as we know, very recently, the Mahakumbh festival was organized, was held in this sacred and pious land of Haridwar. So my work primarily talks about the efforts that went from everyone's side to manage the human-elephant interactions in this area. As we can figure out, the wandering giants in my talk is basically the Asian elephants. The meandering river in this case is the Holy Ganges, and the thundering congregation I'm going to talk about is the event of Mahakumbh 2021. So Rajaji landscape. This place basically needs no introduction, but still to begin with, like my previous colleague had already spoken about it, the importance of deciduous forests. So this is one of the most important patch of forest which is left in this Tarai Arc, overall Tarai Arc landscape, which has beautiful diversity of more than 44 mammal species, as well as a variety of herpetofauna and avifauna. And the most interesting part about this landscape is how it is situated. So it is situated as a physical landscape. It is situated between the foothills, the Bhabar, the Bhangar, and the Khadar. So Bhabar, as we can see from this image of the Rao, so Bhabar is basically consisting of lots of these boulders and small pebbles, which is basically not that conducive for cultivation purposes. So most of these cultivation and agricultural activities takes place in the Khadar areas towards the southern side of the this protected area that I'm talking about, the Rajaji area. So let me just show you the area that I'm going to talk about. So this is the Rajaji landscape. So when I meant the Bhabar areas, these were these particular sites in the Rajaji landscape, whereas the Bhangar and Khadar is basically parts of these flat alluvial plains, which is very fertile for the cultivation of crops. Now, with the cultivation of crops, so what has happened in the recent past is that we have tamed the otherwise wild rivers like the Ganges. So as we can see, there are plenty of, as we can see from the flowchart on our right, there are plenty of dams that has been created in the recent past, like a couple of centuries ago, which has basically tamed the rivers. Now, how does taming a river affect the ecology? So what has happened here is that we have lost pristine animal habitats in the sense that we have lost lots of grasslands, because now the floods were very much predictable. And so there were no floods like it used to happen in the past, like a couple of centuries back. So the human settlement in this area drastically increased in the sense that, so this was a flat alluvial fertile area. So the cultivation and all these agricultural and associated activities took up in this landscape and pitched up really fast, which ultimately resulted in the conversion of all these important grassland areas where the animals used to range into agriculture and crop fields. Now, what I also saw from the last, so now here I talk about my intensive study area. That is basically comprising of both the flanks of the river Ganges, the eastern as well as the western ranges of Haridwar Forest Division and some parts of the Raji Tiger Reserve. So what I basically did, I initially wanted to understand what the patterns of human-elephant conflict in this area. So as we can see from this heat map, so there were plenty of human-wildlife interactions happening, especially in terms of crop damage in this area. So as we can see from the heat maps, on the eastern side of the Ganges as well as on the western side of the Ganges. So this activity is mostly happening here because of the changes that has occurred in the recent past in this landscape. When I say the recent past, I'm talking about a couple of centuries. So the challenges that we face in this landscape is, I would say, not unique than any other elephant range areas, in the sense we have the communities that dwell in and around these forested habitats, where unregulated lopping, extraction of forest products, and even overgrazing is pretty common. And we also have lots of developmental pressures going on in these areas as the cities are radially expanding, the Haridwar, Rishikesh, and these cities. So here what we see is that a lot of developmental activities in terms of linear intrusions, like as well as all the other associated activities like mining, which is already been happening for quite some time now. Now, let me show you, as per the recent elephant census from the Forest Department, how the elephants are distributed in this area. So as we can see, all this elephant population is generally contained within the forested habitats. And even in the Haridwar Forest Division, when I talk about, most of these elephants are like resident in the eastern side of the Ganges, because on the western side of the Ganges, there is hardly any habitat left for them. And then they are obviously also present inside the protected area. Now, so after looking at the overall distribution, what would be interesting to understand how are they separated spatially, at least, how they are separated in terms of the sexes. So as we can very well figure out from this particular visualization is that, so we try to do lots of sighting, reciting on ground, and we kind of figured out that like hardly ever any female groups goes and enters the human dominated landscapes or goes to raid crops. As you can see from this particular graph, most of the males are the ones who are basically taking that risk of entering the human dominated landscape, and for the basically in a way following the high risk high gain strategy for the gain of better nutrition availability in the cultivated crops. Now to understand from the population level to individual level the trends. So the task for us was to basically try and understand which are the elephants that are basically coming into conflict. So because there was an upcoming mega event like Kumbh, which was looming, so we basically wanted to try and understand which are the animals that are potentially coming into conflict in these areas. So our observations based on the previously well-tested and established methods, we try to tease apart these individuals based on their morphological features like the tusks, shape, size, and angle, as well as the ear patterns, as well as the patterns in the tails, basically different morphological features. And we kind of figured out there are roughly around 21 to 25 bull elephants, and specifically only bull elephants that cross the Ganges and takes the risk of entering into the human dominated landscapes to raid crops. So we did this basically we kind of followed them throughout the day. Like our day used to start early at around 4:30 a.m. in the morning, and we used to scan all these banks of the Ganges to see their movement pattern and also look into their activity pattern in the later half of the day. We had direct sightings as well as indirect sightings like the pad marks. Interestingly, we also observed that there are, so this, I'll just show you in the QGIS a little better for the visualization. So interestingly, what has happened in the recent past is that the Ganges keeps changing its channels. So as the channel has changed, erstwhile these islets were all part of the, like, were contiguous with these eastern ranges of the Haridwar Forest Division. But now with the changing of the channels, what has happened is that newly these islets have formed. Now the formation of islets, so we observed that on certain days, the animals are nowhere to be found in their usual daytime refuges. Then it took us the extra effort of crossing, then we took the extra effort of crossing the Ganges and figuring out that, okay, so they're also using the islets as their daytime refuges. So they need not like completely depend on their daytime refuges on the eastern side of the Ganges. So all this effort went to basically try and understand their spatiotemporal movement pattern. Now, so since we could not collar like all the potential animals that were ranging in the area, we focused on collaring some of the key target bull elephants, because it was only bull elephants that were taking this risk of crossing the Ganges and raiding crops on the other side. And as we know, the animal is a very intelligent species, and it's never easy to immobilize an animal which weighs around 4 to 5 tons. So we had to lay out our clear-cut strategy. Like you can see in these images, we lured the animal with salt bricks, with fresh fodder, and then we could basically collar 4 animals in different areas. So how does the collaring help? So as we can see, so basically this visualization will help us understand the crop raiding pattern of these 4 collared animals, the spatiotemporal pattern of these animals in terms of the dial pattern, like the 24-hour cycle that I'm talking about. So as we can figure out that, like with the early dawn, like from dawn till dusk, they would prefer to stay inside their habitat, or basically in any tree cover areas wherever they can find some shelter. And then with the garb of darkness in the dusk hours at around 7:30, they start entering into the human habitat, and then they stay there. Like they completely feed on the paddy, wheat, and sugarcane that are basically grown in the fields, and that even takes place till around 5:30, 6:30 in the morning, where they again have to rush back. So this pattern basically completely fits with our observations on ground as well. And then another interesting thing that we did is that, so unfortunately, 3 of the collars could not function anymore because a couple of them dropped, and one of our animal unfortunately also got electrocuted. So what happened is that one animal continued giving us good information, telemetry data. So we wanted to check is that how the animal is basically using the space and different time of the day and in different stages, physiological stages. So the first stage that I'm talking about is when the animal is not in must, but is still raiding crops. The second stage is the animal is in must and still raiding crops. And in the third stage, the animal is hardly raiding crops. So I'll come to these stages with more physiological context. And then we also see the activity pattern here, where we see that there's a spike in the movement, the speed. The speed here is in kilometer per hour. So the movement, we see there's a spike in early hours of the day when basically they have to cross the Ganges and basically leave the human dominated landscape because there's hardly any cover for them in the day. The speed pretty much picks up and as soon as they are back into their refuges, and then it completely goes down, and then the entire day they have very minimal movement activity of that sort. And then they wait till the late evening, and then after evening, the movement again starts gradually as they start moving towards the human dominated areas. So I'd just like to show a couple of visualizations so that you could understand what I actually am trying to say. So this is how the basically come together and form all male groups, and then cross the Ganges to go on the other side of the Ganges and raid crops. And similarly, when I speak about another spike that is early in the morning, here you can see how the animals are pretty jittery and skittish, and they want to return to their habitat or the daytime refuges as early as possible. Another thing of our interest was to basically understand. So before collaring, we did not know how far these animals ranges in these areas. So before collaring, we did not know like how far these animals move in this area. Do they actually cross these human dominated landscapes or even take shelter in these reserve forests, which are basically some plantation areas, or they go or cross or enter into Rajaji from any other side. But then what we found out is that so these animals hardly go beyond roughly 2 kilometers from the western bank of the Ganges. So this would also help in planning management strategies for these elephants. So movement of animal is pretty much incomplete without setting the ecological context straight. So what we see here is that a very complex species with multi-tiered social system, where they have female groups, and then they also have all male groups, and they also move around in the landscape solitarily. So why is it important to understand is that the very spatiotemporal ranging pattern of female groups is pretty much associated with the movement and movement pattern of the males in the area. So talking about crop raiding, so talking about crop raiding is important in the context of the fitness of the species. So is this strategy facultative or obligate, or like basically is the animal trying to just forage on these species because of its nutritional value, or because it has ultimately lost some part of its home range to the recent development activities, and basically for that it is trying to compensate for the resources lost? So these are the questions which are very important to understand. These are the patterns which are very important to understand. So for that, unless and until we do long-term studies, it will not be viable for us to basically go and speak more about these things. But it is important to understand that why is an animal going and raiding crops? And so there's a very simple equation. If the animal is spending 6 hours in a forested habitat versus if an animal is spending 6 hours in the human-dominated areas, so the overall quantum or the quantity of nutrition that the animal gains in the human-dominated landscapes is much more as compared to the time and effort spent in the forested habitats. So this is basically some sort of an high risk, high gain strategy that the animal uses. It takes that amount of risk for the quantum of nutrition that it gets. So here also, there are a few things that are connected that we need to understand. The animals are basically, there's a high variability in fitness between the sexes. So as we know, this animal is sexually dimorphic. What it means basically is that, so males and females of the species look are physically very different. And to come into must, it is important for the animals to attain good body condition. And to attain good body condition, it needs to have good nutrition level. So all these parts of the stories connect to basically explain their movement pattern in this entire landscape. So what we also notice is that during the must time, the all male groups pretty much disappear. Like when the animals are in must, they prioritize association and mating with females over going for crop raids. But then there are still certain caveats which we would see from certain patterns, because it also depends upon the positioning of the females in the area, and also how spatially the agriculture fields are situated. Now, talking about the Kumbh, we all know that it's a very important and holy congregation which has been happening for thousands of years now, like for a few centuries at least. And then it is basically the largest gathering of humans on the planet. Like even with all the COVID restrictions, thankfully this time the Kumbh, the entire event of managing this Kumbh was only limited to the couple of weeks in April. But overall, this would ideally was supposed to start from Jan to April. Then it would have been a massive task for the entire department and us to try and manage these animals. And so the colored islets that we see here are basically the potential Kumbh sites, camping sites that were basically demarcated by the department, by the government, for staging this event. And as you can see, the translucent space use pattern of elephants, like all these islets pretty much overlap with the movement pattern of elephants. But I'd like to show you something which would basically explain why even after such overlaps, we could still manage the pulling of this event without much of any issues. Is that, see, all these red points that I'm showing you here right now is basically all the collated points from all the individuals during the crop raiding season. As you can see, they are very much crossing the Ganges and raiding crops on the other side, and then in the daytime they are coming to their islets and other couple of refugias. Now what's happening during the so this is for the collared animal whom we have observed for more than 6 months now. So we see here that during musk, it's roving in relatively larger area in a smaller space of time. But what is interesting to note is that when the animal is not in musk and there is like almost next to low crop availability on the other side of the Ganges, the animal is mostly staying inside the forest and hardly it's going to raid crops. So this is one of the important things which happened during the Kumbh event, because of which I presume that the animals hardly crossed the Ganges during those couple of weeks and were mostly contained within the forest boundaries. Now, some other efforts which are still going on in the field, which will help us reveal the overall spatio-temporal patterns of conflict and its drivers. We are also collecting like data from, we are monitoring 45 villages and collecting primary data on human-elephant conflict from these areas, which are primarily the crop raiding incidents that's happening in these villages, which are adjoining the forested areas. Apart from this, the department also had a massive task of containing these elephants and preventing them from entering the Kumbh camping sites. So what they did is that they came up with the gabion structures, the wall and the solar fences, which in a way also diverted the elephants from their usual movement areas and mostly contained them towards the eastern side of the Ganges, basically inside the forested habitats. So what is the way forward? So the way forward for us would require long-term monitoring programs. Basically, for a species like elephant, which is a long-lived species, it would be a very premature effort from our side to talk anything about its ranging behavior or its sociality without looking into. Basically, we are just looking at very small snapshots, and therefore stitching a story out of it would be very difficult in a meaningful way. So therefore, we need science-driven policy interventions as well. Like which part, like how is these decisions that we are taking affecting the land use patterns, especially how are the interface areas changing adjoining the for elephant habitats. We need to work on the compensation schemes. Basically, we cannot basically otherize the communities that live along the boundaries of these elephant habitats, because we have to take them in as our key stakeholders in whatever we do, so as to also have a long-term effect on the species. And because elephant conservation is also is dependent on these communities, because what happens is that unless and until we take them into confidence, there is a lot of antagonism against these elephants who basically go and destroy their livelihood. There's a lot of effort that goes from their side, and there's a lot of unseen costs as well. See, for example, some of them spending days and hours protecting their crops from these machans. Like the quality of life is drastically altered. There are opportunity costs. So overall, what we also need from the conservation perspective is landscape level approach. While when we are talking about landscape level approach, there are already good examples of corridors that exist in this landscape. So as to maintain these corridors and facilitate effective movement of animals between their habitats, it's essential that we factor in the conservation approaches for these corridors, basically landscape level conservation approaches. And it's also important that there's no silver bullet or one short solution for all these kind of complex problems, because the animals that are raiding crops on the other side of the Ganges, primarily including the all male groups, managing them would be pretty much different from managing a female group that is entering a human dominated landscape to raid crops. So therefore, we also need site-specific management plans. So yeah, this is it about my talk. This is what I would have to say from our efforts of the ongoing work in the Raji landscape. Yeah, thank you. And yeah, without this team, we would go nowhere, be it monitoring of the animals in these risky areas, or the collaring efforts, or even attaining the secondary data. So all these officials, starting from the forest department staff to the frontline staff, and also the field assistants, are imperative for the long-term conservation in these areas.
Thank you, Jayji, for this wonderful talk. and also highlighting how science can help in understanding the movement, behavior, and conflicts associated with elections, and how it can also help drive the policy decisions. So thank you very much indeed. We will now move on to the next part of this event, which is about releasing a documentary that is prepared by the Wildlife Institute of India. And the title of the documentary is Gentle Giants in the Changing Times. This documentary is a 6 minutes film, which is documenting the pragmatic options available for managing human-elephant conflicts in a common parlance to reach out to the people. So here it is, we are sharing and releasing for the first time. Hope you enjoy it.
Asian elephants, the gentle giant of the Indian forest, are iconic species. That have roamed this planet for thousands of years and are now revered as the national heritage animal of the country. They are ingrained in our mythology, culture, art, folklore, literature. And festivals, and are considered as a sign of prosperity and well-being. They have played vital.
We are facing a little audio issue with the documentary. We will be streaming it once again in just a few seconds.
Can you just ask me, is it visible?
Asian elephants, the gentle giant of the Indian forest, are iconic species that have roamed this planet for thousands of years and are now revered as the national heritage animal of the country. They are ingrained in our mythology, culture, art, folklore, literature, and festivals, and are considered as a sign of prosperity and well-being. They have played a vital role in maintaining ecological balance and are referred to as the ecosystem engineers, as they shape, build and rejuvenate natural landscapes, thus regulating the nutrient cycles and enriching biomass productivity. Once inhabiting considerable areas in Asia covering most of the continent, spanning from the river basin of Tigris and Euphrates in the west to the whole of Southeast Asia in the east, they have experienced drastic range contraction over the years, with the ranges now reducing to less than 6% of the historical range. In India, elephants currently occur in 4 major regions, with considerable population in the northeast, northwest, east central and southern region that holds around 30,000 individuals in the wild. Elephants occur in a variety of habitats across the country and are known to be generous feeders, feeding on all the 3 tiers of the forest, including herbs, shrubs, and the trees. They are known to have very large home ranges that may span several hundred kilometers, often ranging across states and even countries. They live in multi-level societies with well-knit families of closely related individuals and demonstrate a strong family bond. The major challenges faced in the recent times that influence the very existence of elephants in the Indian landscape include loss of habitat resulting from habitat fragmentation and destruction. This in turn results in animals coming out of their natural habitats into human-dominated landscapes. Additionally, the growing human demands and the resultant developmental activities further affect their movement and ranging pattern that is imperative for their survival. It results in uncalled interactions with humans that at times become negative, resulting in loss of human life and property. The cost of such activities is also borne by elephants as they lose life due to retaliatory killing, accidents, and even injuries that compromise their well-being and survival in the wild. Scientific interventions, including animal capture and subsequent translocation, is one of the options for providing safer homes to these wild sentinels. The GPS-enabled telemetry has also provided real-time information on elephant movement, and besides research, it provides an early warning system in conflict resolution. Advancements in technology, including aerial surveillance using drones, use of thermal and seismic sensors to detect elephant movement in vulnerable areas, are proving beneficial to understand animal movement and manage human-elephant conflict. Being smart, with exploratory innate behavior, with time these animals learn to overcome these barriers and therefore calls for innovative technologies integrating approaches of science and management to restrict their movement in human-dominated landscapes. Trained human resources, including mahouts, trackers, frontline staff, wildlife biologists, veterinarians, and experienced forest officers are perhaps India's best resources in managing human-elephant conflict. Additionally, the well-trained Kunkis are valuable assets that have been a big support while managing human-elephant conflict. The need of the hour is to enhance and strengthen these capacities for effective conservation of elephants in the country. The way forward would include consolidating viable elephant habitats and having a landscape-level approach with active participation of key stakeholders aimed at preserving large and intact habitats for long-term survival of the species. It would also call for identifying critical corridors that would facilitate unhindered movement of elephants between the habitats and across the country. It would require our collective efforts to save this magnificent species from extinction for generations unborn.
That was the documentary Gentle Giants in the Changing Times. Now we will move on to the last section and the segment of this event, which is announcing the results for the events that were conducted during last 1 week to mark the celebration of World Elephant Day. We organized 3 contests. Starting with the photography contest, the theme of which was Elephants in Action, and we received 18 entries for this particular competition. The second one was painting contest, and the theme for the painting contest was Paint for Wildlife. Overall, 59 entries were received for this painting competition. And the third event was short essay writing contest, in which we received 7 entries, and the theme for this particular contest was human-elephant coexistence in the 21st century. And here we are releasing the the results and the winners for the photography contest. The first winner for the photography contest is Mr. Varun Thakkar, the theme for which was Elephant in Action. The second winner is Jetal Shah. The third winner for the photography contest is Maulik Sarkar. We also have some appreciation awards for this event, which is for Ronak Shah and Pawan Prasad, both getting appreciation certificate for their entries in photography contest. We also have appreciation award for Signan Varghese and Jyotish Ranjan Deka. Umar Saeed also wins appreciation award, and so as Mr. Sipu Kumar for the photography contest. The next event was the painting contest, and as I have mentioned, the theme was Paint for Wildlife. The first winner is Mr. Ashirwad Das from Odisha. This is his painting. He is from class 6 from DAV Public School. The second winner is Nirvigna Pitha. Nirvigna Pitha is a student of 4th standard from Sivanand Rajaram School, Senior Secondary School. The next award goes to Deepshika Dey. She wins the 3rd prize for the painting competition, and she is in class 7. Appreciation award for the painting competition goes to Ananya Rao and Chalma Junali. Ananya is from class 7. Also, the appreciation prize goes to Sai Sanchita Ratha. She is from Kendriya Vidyalaya 3, Bhubaneswara. And V. Vidya Darshini also wins the appreciation award. She is 7 years old and she is in standard 2. And a wonderful painting that is painted by her, being so young. The third contest, which was the essay writing contest, and the theme was Human-Elephant Coexistence in 21st Century. The first winner is V. Lokesh. Second winner is Khushi Mittal. Third prize goes to Anubhav Bisht. And we have the appreciation prize for the essay contest to Ojasvi Tadiyal. From the emails of NVIS Center. With this, we come to the end of this contest and the celebrations for the World Elephant Day, the 10th anniversary celebration. I now invite Mr. Uday Raj to please present a vote of thanks and officially mark an end to this celebration from Wildlife Institute of India. Over to you, Mr. Udairaj.
Am I audible? Yes.
Yes, you are.
Yeah, thanks everyone. So I take this opportunity to propose a vote of thanks. Yeah, I guess the video is also on. So I take this opportunity to propose a vote of thanks for the webinar jointly organized by the Elephant Cell with the NVIS resource partner of WI on the occasion of World Elephant Day 2021 being celebrated throughout the year. At the outset, I would like to thank Director, Dr. Dhananjay Mohan sir, and Dean, Dr. Y.V. Jala sir, Faculty of Wildlife Science, for all the encouragements and extending all possible supports for organizing this webinar. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank Dr. Ruchi Barola ma'am for the inaugural address that flagged the issues related to the elephant conservation and management that rightly address the theme of this Elephant Day celebration. Thanks are due to Dr. Shivakumar, Dr. Anju Barot, Dr. Parag Nigam for supporting this initiative and providing guidance in conducting this webinar. I would also take this moment to thank the speakers, Sri Lakshmi Narayanan, Project Scientist, Elephant Cell, and Sri Jayjit Das, DST Inspire Fellow, for a talk that was quite exhaustive and cover the current issues on conservation and management of elephants. I congratulate the participants and winners of this contest and for the active participation. The program would not be possible without the active participation and support of Sri Dinesh Pundir and technical engineer Sri Ankit Singh from IT and remote sensing cell, and Mr. Amir Lone, GA specialist from NVIS. I would like to end up this webinar with a question of Sir David Attenborough. The question is, are we happy to suppose that our grandchildren may never be able to see an elephant except in a picture book? Let's save elephants to save the ecosystem. Thank you for your patience. Nandri, Dhanyavad, mercy, and thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everybody, for attending this event and the online session. The live streaming will also be available on our YouTube channel. Thank you very much. Have a good day, everybody.